Let me give you a little history lesson about Laowa lenses. For years they made the weird stuff. They made probe lenses, ultra wides, macros, the kind of stuff that the other camera manufacturers would never really think to produce. And they've gotten very good in the last little while, even introducing a few autofocus lenses quite recently. But I was not expecting this. This is the Laowa 200mm f2C Dreamer lens, which is very specifically targeting sports photographers, professional portrait work, the kind of audience who usually haven't been looking at Laowa lenses. How does it do? Well, I'm Jordan Drake, this is PetaPixel, and we're going to find out. One interesting thing about this lens is it's available in Sony E mount, Nikon Z mount, but also Canon EF mount, the old DSLR mount. But then I just got thinking about EF mount and how it's one of the most adaptable lens mounts out there, and then I found myself drifting over to KEH.com, where they have all kinds of wonderful used cameras and lenses, and they have a massive selection of EF lenses that I've kind of forgotten about. There were some great lenses released in that mount that you could put on almost any modern mirrorless camera right now. And if you're curious about the condition, well, don't worry, because KEH very carefully lays out the condition of all of the lenses that they're selling. And you know, if it turns out like, no, I've moved on past the EF mount, well, they also have a generous return policy. So if you want to get into some great used optics, the place to go is KEH.com. That's why they're PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. So a little bit of context on why I'm hosting this episode. Chris is presently traveling around Australia, and that happened right at the time that we received this Laowa 200mm, which is a really exciting lens that we definitely wanted to get out as soon as possible. So I've brought in my good friend Levi Hallwell to shoot this episode, and he's shooting it on the brand new C50 we'll be reviewing shortly, so keep an eye out for how the footage looks. So back in the day, a 200mm f2 was kind of a classic indoor sports lens, and they were available from like Canon and Nikon, but it's been a long time since we've seen one of those. And looking at lens development cycles, usually like 3 to 4 years, I bet Laowa's been working on this for quite some time. But hilariously, just a few months ago, Sigma also dropped a 200 f2, so we've got some very direct competition to this Laowa optic, but this is quite different. For starters, that Sigma lens is only available for mirrorless mounts, specifically for E and L mount, where, as I mentioned, this is for E, Z mount, and because it's available in EF mount, that means you can adapt it to basically every mirrorless camera out there, and as well, you can actually use this lens if you're still rocking a DSLR. Despite being a Laowa lens, this looks and feels a lot like professional lenses from the first-party lens manufacturers. You can see that it's absolutely covered in controls. We've got a focus limiter, manual focus, autofocus selector switch, custom buttons all around the ring here, and we do have an aperture ring, which can be either clicky or declicked if you're shooting video. We also have the option to load in 43mm filters, which is going to be awesome if you want to grab like a polarizer. We can see there's a little dial here to rotate those, and it'll keep you from buying 105mm filters, which is what the actual front barrel on this is. That big front element also requires the use of this very large hood. The other thing that we have on here is a beautiful Arca Swiss cut tripod collar, and that is removable if you want to cut down the weight of the lens a little bit. At its lightest, this lens is around 1,600 grams, but remember, that's for the EF version. If you're looking at the mirrorless versions, they are a bit heavier, as you can see here, and really quite comparable to the Sigma 200mm f2. Now, one of the things I was most curious to test is the autofocus on this new Laowa, because I think this is going to be very popular as a sports lens, and you have to remember, Laowa didn't even make autofocus lenses until a couple of years ago. So to put it to a test, we've got Devon Riep here. He's going to be doing some bike tricks for us. We're going to shoot some portraits as well, and see if this lens can keep up with a demanding situation.
Something good.
interesting. It's having trouble, it really is. So initially, it looks really good through the viewfinder when I'm shooting, but then when I go back and review pictures, just whenever there's a sudden speed change, whenever Devon's speeding up or slowing down all of a sudden, I'm finding that it's just always a little behind, or it's just overshooting slightly. So it's worth pointing out, like all third-party lenses, if you get this in E-mount, you are limited to 15 frames per second with tracking autofocus, so I do have to drop my frame rate on the A1 II body that I'm using here right now. But I don't know, in terms of using this for like sports and action, I definitely did struggle a little bit with it. And just anytime we had a rapid change in speed, when we're shooting at those very high frame rates, and especially wide open, I just found it was a little bit out of focus. But definitely thanks for helping us out, Devon. Check out his socials. And even though the focus was struggling, I did get some bangers, so I'll send those off to you.
Absolutely.
All right, on this Laowa lens is the Bokeh OK. Well, it's actually way better than OK. I was very impressed with the bokeh that we get off of this lens. Let's start with specular highlights. You get quite a bit of cat's eye if you're shooting this wide open. You get a nice swirly look. But if you look inside, you can see no onion rings, just very clean specular highlights with a tiny bit of a soap bubble effect. Now, if you do stop the lens down, you can see it does take on a little bit of a polygonal shape here, but nothing too distracting. And what this leads to is if you have shallow depth of field in your shot, you get incredibly smooth transitions from in focus to out of focus. One of the big reasons to get a really fast telephoto is for shallow depth of field, and this lens does a great job in those situations. We'll get one last shot of these flowers as everything is dying here, but yeah, I mean, this is not a macro lens. We're getting 0.15 times magnification. Laowa lenses are known for having some of the most interesting flare characteristics, which can sometimes give you really, really interesting images, and sometimes they can be massively distracting. So how does the 200mm fare? So you can see here, if we shoot wide open with a bright light source behind the subject, you don't get a lot of artifacts and a lot of defects in the image. You just get a general lack of contrast, a little bit of a glowing, dreamy look to the image, which does definitely go away when you stop down. When you stop down, you're going to encounter something else, and that's ghosts. Now, these are not scary Amityville horror ghosts. These are like Casper the Friendly Ghost ghosts, but they're there. All right, let's talk about LoCA. And if you don't know what LoCA is, well, that's great, because we have it on a shirt. You could buy the shirt, you could read it, and then you'll know what LoCA is. So this lens does exhibit a little bit of LoCA. As you can see, when we're looking at the very bright highlights, we get a tiny bit of a green and magenta split between the foreground and background out of focus areas. It's not a deal breaker, it's not a huge issue, but it is something you should be aware of. So how does this lens perform for video? It can give you a pretty unique look, so I could see people using it occasionally, and I love the feel of the manual focus ring on this lens. That said, there is a fair amount of breathing when you're pulling focus, and breathing is where you can see the field of view change as we move focus from minimum to infinity. It can be a little bit distracting if you need to pull focus mid-shot, and you should be aware this lens does exhibit a bit of breathing. Is this lens sharp? I know that's all any of you want to know, and thankfully before he fled for the land down under, Chris was able to shoot some chart shots of this lens, so let's take a look at them right now. And zooming in at the center, wide open, you can see there's just kind of a lack of fine detail, kind of a dreaminess to it, but what's really impressive is when we stop this lens down, it is extremely sharp and tons of contrast in it. And it's actually a very similar story when we jump over to the corners. Here you can see again kind of a dreamy, low contrast softness in the corners, but once we stop this lens down, it is extremely sharp in the corners as well. In fact, the entire frame is tack sharp once you stop down to f4. So I really kind of look at this as a lens with two personalities. You've got to really like that kind of dreaminess wide open, but if you're looking for clinical sharpness across the frame, this lens can definitely achieve that. You're just going to have to stop down. Okay, so what are my final thoughts on the Laowa 200mm f2? Well, it's quite interesting. If this had come out a couple of years ago when there were really no modern 200 f2s on the market, I think this would find a real niche for itself. It's got a very distinctive image when you're shooting it wide open with some of that dreaminess that some people are really going to like. The thing is, the Sigma 200 f2, while it is more expensive, has also come out, and if your camera supports those mounts, that is a far sharper lens wide open, less prone to flare, and incredibly responsive autofocus on it. I just think it's a better lens overall, even though it is more money. That said, I absolutely love shooting with a 200 f2, and if you're using Nikon Z or Canon RF, it's really nice that you now have a more affordable option, because some of those old Canon and Nikon designs still fetch a huge premium over what this lens is selling for new. And now that Laowa's dipped their toe into professional autofocus lenses, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they have coming out next. So let me know what you think of Laowa's 200mm C Dreamer in the comments below. And if you want to know what Chris thinks of this lens, you should definitely listen to the PetaPixel podcast. You can watch it right here on this YouTube channel or listen to it on all of your favorite podcasting apps. And if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is with a PetaPixel membership. Not only are you supporting our show, but also you will get discounts at keh.com, the Moment Store, our own merch store. You can access sample galleries with full-size JPEGs and RAWs, and also browse petapixel.com ads-free. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all soon with more on PetaPixel.